All right. So this is a video I made this weekend, or no, earlier in the week, and I had an audio problem. I lost about a half an hour of video, which sucked. So I think it's fine this time. Basically, they're not exactly on the topic of free will, but you can see that I'm dealing with the model. In fact, this two of the three videos that I'm going to go through, um, excuse me, deal with a model where instead of a film strip, I was talking about us as, this input box, the outside arrows coming in, the fact they have to actually be drawn on the inside, and so on and so forth. And I think it'll give some perspective of, you know, to how I'm trying to model this and models we might be able to agree on as starting points. Um, the other thing is this five levels. The middle video is five levels of epistemological reality that I think also will explain what I think is going on and maybe some of the other words I've used around the idea that we have a first person sense of self, which is us. The perceptions are happening. We feel like we're the perceiver. Could be an illusion, however you want to put that. That's level one. And there's a level higher up that involves deduction and stuff where we understand agents as third persons, so third person sense of self. And we can actually think of ourselves as inside a third person, right? We're thinking of ourselves as an object with this agency. And sometimes we forget that explaining the third person agency, that's the easy problem. Explaining first person agency, that's the hard problem. Anyway, I don't go into those particular details. This isn't about freedom of the will, but it's about the construction of the will. So I will play
I want to make a couple more videos referring to this diagram I made and get into some of the issues that I wanted to address. The first one is why the materialistic model. Um, why do we?
Okay, wait. I'm doing this out of order. Sorry, this is the first one. Sorry about that.
Hello, modern mystic. There's a little
He didn't reply.
thing about reality. I said I'd make another
In fact, I think he called me a liar.
video. There's actually even some other points that I'd like to make, but I think this covers enough for one video. Probably more than enough. Okay, first I think here's a picture that I think we'll both agree with. Okay, there's the material world and the mind. I'm not going to call one the real and the imaginary because, as I said, I think this is a false dichotomy. But I will.
So, by the way, this is from 8 years ago, or nine now.
Let's just call the whole mess reality, and we have the material and the mind. Okay. One thing I'm not going to go into is how the mind makes an appearance in the material model as well. But we're just going to deal with this because we know we have the mind. We're going to discuss the material. So the idea here is that you see a mug, and the
Okay, again, we know we have the mind. We're discussing the material.
arrows in the material world are ideas here that photons and other events are reaching us. This black line, which is our interface with the world, our
The
senses or
limit.
whatever. Then we have perceptions on the other side, meant to, you know, be well, not meant to. The idea is that they're related to these events that get sent to us. We take all of these different, what are represented as color arrows, and we reproduce an idea of the mug in our mind. But it doesn't just give us the idea of the mug, right? Seeing this mug does not just give us the idea of the mug. We don't just form an image of this cylindrical mug. We also, in this case, think of Ferraris. And we think of dear old dad because he sure loved Ferraris. So we get a lot of things in our mind from this sense input. I also could have shown some of the colored arrows in the mind missing, right? Because some of the events coming to us from the material world we just don't notice or can't sense.
Right, so I could have shown some of these lighter, fainter arrows as missing, because our model includes the fact that light hits your skin. There's all kinds of material input that doesn't actually make it into the mind. So I was just showing ones that did.
The reality is, though, wait a second, we don't know what's in the material world. All we know is the color arrows.
Right. So that's a part of our model, that there's those brighter colored arrows from the real flavored world. Really, what we have is this information on the mind side of it, and we're making deduction and induction about what's in this black space.
In the mind, they're coming in, the perceptions. That's all we know. And the reason we don't know is because all we're getting is these internal perceptions. We're reconstructing this model, but we do have the model. We think the cup is out there. So if it's not really necessarily out there because we don't know it's out there, we're just deducing from this internal arrows, then where is it? Well, it's in the mind as well. Our concept of what's out there in the material world is really in our own mind.
So that's the point. We don't know what's in here. We have a model. We think we know what's in here. And since we don't actually know it, where is the thing that is our candidate for what's out here? Where is that candidate for what the material is? It's another picture in our mind.
And the way to illustrate this is we don't know what's causing these input arrows. It's just our model of what would cause it. It's consistent with causing these perceptions that there's events coming from the cup. It's turned out to be very consistent. It could be a computer, right? It could be a computer sending us all this information. We would still have the model of the cup because that would be consistent with what we receive. And since it's functionally equivalent, these two things, we can't tell which it would be. Similarly, it could be that we are a dream. Someone's dreaming us. And we'll never know.
Now, what I hold about functional equivalence, when two things function exactly the same so much that you can't tell the difference, right? I say those two things are epistemologically equivalent, and they're just different words for the same thing. And all things being equal, you get to just choose. So, for example, if it's easier to deal with your equations in radial coordinates, you could choose that. If it's easier in Cartesian coordinates, you could choose that. And there's no difference. Those are functionally equivalent. The two different sets of equations that you get out, what's solvable and solvable, is a matter of your tokenizing of the rhetoric. And really, you're describing the same thing. Okay, so we have a functional equivalence to being in a matrix or being in someone's dream, potentially, except for both those metaphors are not about saying you could have a functionally equivalent world. When people say they're in the dream, they're talking about that they could, make that dream lucid and start flying or whatever. And if they're talking about being in the matrix, then you could take the proper pill and realize it. And they're invoking those parts of the metaphor where there are differences, right? Because if you had a dream where the laws of physics are trackable and work and are consistent down to the molecule, down to the photon, there really would be no difference. And you wouldn't expect to tell the difference, and it wouldn't matter anyway, because if you ended up finding out you were in Vishnu's dream and the laws of physics were exactly the same, it wouldn't change the laws of physics. You just go, oh, what I've learned about with these laws of physics is how Vishnu's brain works, right? And it would all come to the same result.
Oh, so why do we choose one of these models rather than the other? Well, I mean, the short answer is because, we like to. Maybe a little bit longer answer is because it makes more sense. It's more useful. The reason it makes more sense to us, I think, is multivariate and different. But for one, if we are a dreamer, then we're trying to think, well, how can we have these dream powers in this dream? It's a world of imagination. Perhaps we can wish a reality. Or if we think it's a computer, maybe we're trying to hack the computer. And yet if we think it's a material world, we aren't distracted by those things. And we remember to look at the perceptions, to always go back to the perceptions, because there's no underlying reality. Things just...
So the point here is that given a series of functionally equivalent explanations, when you choose one, there's a psychological difference. Why you chose that one has a psychological explanation, right? So that's where the difference lies, and that shows you how, even though you might argue they're functionally equivalent, really you're thinking there's going to be an exploitable difference.
Are what they are, and there's a simplicity there. Whereas if things are really generated by a computer, we've got to be looking for that, and it's never helped us to look for that kind of thing. To try to think we're in a dream and give ourselves magical powers like we might have in a dream, that's never worked out so well. But really, the only important thing is that we think that there's something outside causing our internal perceptions, and the reason that's important is because then that means there's some sort of external world. I mean, even if we're in a dream.
So this is really what relates most to our argument, is that the issue that when you're saying there's outside objects and bowling balls and gears and stuff, and that's what the world's made of, that's an important statement. I mean, it says something about how you view the world, but there's actually two statements. One is that we're getting information from a shared space at all. Even if we're in a dream, the fact that there's other dreamers and we're getting information from the set of outside dreamers, things shared between me and the other dreamers, we're saying, hey, the whole solipsistic idea that I'm generating these doesn't seem to be the case. If I experiment on trying to generate different things, it doesn't succeed too well.
And our external world is the dream world of some other entity, or or so on. The uh, the computer that is giving us these perceptions. This is the key belief, because if you believe that, then you can keep investigating the material in it. Whereas if you don't believe that and you just think everything is in the mind, it's all a creation of the mind, the perceptions are a creation of the mind, then you really have no other choice but to think that, oh, you can just will your hunger away. And the problem there is that if you think you can just will your hunger away, you'll starve to death. You have no reason to go. You have to at least subconsciously at some point realize you need to go get food.
So when we draw these arrows in the outside area here, that's a theory. Right there, we're making a huge statement. Just saying that there's outside arrows, whatever, everything else is still a void. We don't know. It's not a void, but there's a lack of knowledge about what else is there. Just saying that the information's coming from outside, from a separate dreamer from us, from a computer that isn't us, from a material world. That's the major statement there, right? And that's different from solipsism, where the mind is generating it and there's some sort of a U-turn. Because here's the thing too, is like if the mind is generating it, but it's so cut off from us that any experiments to try to control it fail, how is that not actually a separate thing? And our inability to be the author of our own perceptions is externality, and that would be functionally equivalent to a mechanical externality. And I remind you, in my school of philosophy, if you can argue that there's a functional equivalence between two things, then you've justified viewing it as one of those equivalent things as opposed to another, as long as you acknowledge other people, for whatever reasons or context, might choose to view it the other way. Um, so, for example, I'm fine with people viewing the world as though we're in a dreamer, as long as they realize it's as consistent as a mechanical physics, which unfortunately for them means it's inherently unlike a dream. In a dream that we have when we're asleep, there's a kind of inconsistency. A discontinuity seems to happen. It might technically still be continuous, but I mean, objects appear and disappear, and things change character, and a person that was this becomes that.
So ultimately, we use this model because it's helped our survival better than anything else so far, and I think that's a pretty good reason. But this shows why I say when we talk about reality in terms of the material world, we really need to remember we're talking about this model in our mind. Because if we want to talk about reality, we can't get those brighter color arrows. We have to have the dimmer perception arrows in the mind. That's what we have to refer to. We would never talk about the mug. The mug is something that's a conception in our mind. We would only talk about the fact that we saw red, that it felt cold, that it had certain shapes involved, that these shapes added together to shapes we also recognize as more abstract shapes, and so on. And that's not what we're talking about when we talk about reality or the material world. We're always talking about our model of what it might be. In other words, a model that is consistent with the sense data we believe we're receiving from this external world. Cheers.
Gary, it is clear that you think and feel at the same time, and I mean you in particular, okay? There's just total thinking and feeling all mixed up and interleaved in your stuff. Now,
This is
you
not
might think
this is not the second
they're
video.
separate.
Okay.
Well, let's see. I haven't really thought about how I want to say this, but I want to talk
Yeah, this has come up. People suggested, was I drunk the other
Fuck's
day?
sake,
And I'm
stop
playing
it.
a game.
Okay. Here is the next video about the layers of epistemology. So this diagram, if you look at it, it has decreasing relative certainty in this direction. So this is less certain than this. And the layers are that one, perceptions happen to us. Processing that information, we come up with a subjective solipsistic model of how perceptions behave. When I do this, the mom shape comes, it gives me a banana. Okay, then we come with a model of materialism. Mom is a thing, separate from banana is a thing. The refrigerator is a thing. Mom interacts with the refrigerator and a cold banana comes out or whatever. After that, we have a model of perception saying, oh, I am receiving information about all these things, and that's how I know what I know. So when I don't have much information, I can know, oh, I need to perceive more. I can point my eyes more in that direction. Then on top of that is this view of the self as a third person, that there's third person agents. Now suddenly when we see mom, we know mom is like us. She's a third person self, just like I'm actually a third person self to her. Of course, this whole time, what is more certain is that I'm a first person self and perceptions happen to me. That should probably say perceptions happen to me.
A video that is inspired by listening to some of these replies, but it's not a specific reply. It's interesting. Sometimes I see the videos and I have ideas, and they're obviously related to what I've been watching, but they're not exactly responses in the sense that I'm not making a counterpoint that's related to one of their points directly. Instead, I'm putting a new, or really, this isn't the new. I'm going to re-describe what I think the situation is. Okay, so I have this chart, and it's epistemological, and it's decreasing level of certainty from the bottom. Okay, so if I do the Descartes meditative, exercise, I doubt everything that I can doubt. I doubt he got down to I think, therefore I am. That I think he didn't get that quite right. He couldn't really know that he was the one thinking, for example. That is not as certain as can be. So,
because we think the brain generates us. So we're the result of thinking. The brain's the thing thinking. So that's why I say perceptions just happen to us instead of I perceive or something even higher level like I think.
what do we have at the bottom? We have that I perceive, therefore I am. I don't know that I think. I don't say I cause the perceptions or not. I simply say that I'm having perceptions. Because while in the traditional classical philosophy, we'd like to go all the way down to the most abstract principles that are just solid because the principles themselves are solid, I don't think we can do that. We have to go down to the human condition. And that's right. That means that it'd be a different meditation if we were a dog or some other kind of creature, or if we were a human trying to say, well, what is it like for a cockroach? We're saying, what is it? What do I know best of all as a human? I know that I receive perceptions. Okay. On top of that, here I build a model about the patterns in perceptions. How do perceptions behave? And at this level, basically, I have a subjective view of myself. So not only do I have the perceptions, but I'm saying something about the perceptions. Like, some of the perceptions seem quite consistent, and there's these different sense spaces. I can categorize some perceptions as being sound-like in nature, and some are visual in nature, and so on. And it's basically still solipsistic because I haven't granted that there's anything other than me and my perceptions. Okay, I have not granted that there's some other creature having its own perceptions. Okay, now after I've done that, based on these patterns, I can create a model of materialism. Okay, and this is again from perceptions, and the way this works really well is you have your perceptions, you generate a model, and then if you can use that model to right then the model is descriptive. But if you use that model to predict what a future perception that you haven't had will be, suddenly that becomes descriptive as well. And this is how we get faith in these models. But it's still on top of our subjective experiences, right? Our model of materialism. Then using that model of materialism, we come up with a materialistic model of perception. Okay, and this is where we start to get confused. In this material model of perception, we know that objects are out there, and we consider them as objects. And what is the view of the self in that model? It's the view of the self as a third person. Okay. Now this is where we get confused because we want to say, hey, we figured out how our perceptions are made. We have this model of perception, so shouldn't it go down here below this one?
See, we've decided, hey, what's really going on is we're all objects. It's a third person perspective world. So our model of perception it becomes that there's all these, you know, third person bodies interacting. That's generating our perception. So we want to put as our fundamental axiomatic level this third person view of self. But no matter what we do, it's really built in this direction.
Down here, off the screen below, because that's where our perceptions are coming from. But to do that is inherently circular. You're taking something less certain and you're putting it underneath something more certain, which right away is a problem. Okay. It's circular because you're still depending on the perceptions to say what causes perceptions, right? And then worst of all, you have changed your sense of personal self. Because look, there's two senses of self here, right? There's two senses, let's see if I can do this. These two senses of self. One, which is your subjective self, what it's like to be a human and behave like a human and have a human.
And that's the important thing here, is that in a philosophy of living, I think it's a huge problem that everybody sees themselves as a little person in the world, when that's how they think they see themselves. In reality, they're in their own theater and all of that with their own film strip. They are totally as rooted in their own individual experience as ever they were, but they tell themselves, no, I'm an objective person. I'm just walking around the world like everybody else, and I think about other people the same way as I think about me. We're all little people walking around the world, but we know that's not true. Your own likes, dislikes, everything else, they weigh on you in a phenomenally important way. The fundament of your own knowledge, the fundamental layer of your own knowledge is still personal, and it's an illusion and disconnecting from the sense of self, right? Which illusion or not, that's what we are. We are the universe generating a first person experience, having a first person experience. It's from the laws of physics. We are nothing but what's going on at our location in space, and our location in space is having a first person experience. It might be an illusion that it thinks it can pick up the apple or leave the apple. It's fated to do one or the other, but it is having a first person experience. That experience is happening. It only is open for us to figure out what, it really means that it's going on. The fact that there's this first person homunculus kind of thing apparently uh, generated means that that illusion is actually generated in the universe, and we are nothing but a part of the universe. So when you say we have a feeling, it's the universe having a feeling, and that's primary to people's experience of existing at all, right? And it's therefore its problems are the problems that need to be solved by philosophy or by any other benefit to mankind.
Human experience and at least feel like you're willing and that you're inside this mind and body and you're doing something with it. Whereas this top view of self is as a third person. It's a person as though you're looking at a person. So it's the behavior of a person when you're watching a person behave. Well, the experience of being a person behaving, the subjective person, is different from the experience of watching another third person behave. And furthermore, to watch another third person behave, you have to have a subjective point of view to watch that from. So this objectivity has to still happen. So when you want to replace that model and put it underneath the perceptions that happen to us, you can't do that epistemologically. You have to leave that model up to, in the higher levels, in the less certain levels. You have to leave it up there. It's still an explanation, but the difference is that as an explanation, you can judge the various explanations the way you've always judged them, through the subjective stream of consciousness that you experience. So it's a descriptive model, but it remains a theory. If you try to put that below perceptions, it becomes a metaphysics where it can't be questioned, because there is nothing able to question things below experiences. We use experiences to question everything. So that's why you can't do that. It's also why you don't need to do that. And these cycles that you see where something appears more fundamental, because see, in the materialistic model, the existence of the external world is more fundamental than the existence of us as individuals. But for us to discover that, we have to exist as individuals. So for us, it's always going to be that our subjective experience is more primary. This would not be that important if, one, space wasn't so relativistic, physics wasn't so relativistic. And then we could pretend there was this third person objective point of view, and we could try to use that. But it is relativistic, and we don't have access to that. There doesn't seem to be such a point of view that we could discover and then jump to and somehow outsmart our limitations of having a stream of perceptions and nothing else to go with. So hopefully that describes why, what we're talking about, or at least how I'm interpreting what we're talking about. What you're asking me to do by accepting that these are metaphysical principles is you're asking me to take them down this chart, take something that I'm less certain about, and put it as more primary than something I'm more certain about. And I think that's contrary to what we need to do in philosophy or science or any building of knowledge. We have to start with the most certain things and work our way up. TJ or TJ, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, has
Oh yeah, that was the whole thing.
asked my spirituality. What is my spirituality? My spiritual background.
Spirituality, I shouldn't answer that probably. Okay, and here is the final one where I am describing. People in comments are complaining that I'm too fast to begin with, so let's 1.25. How This one I'm explaining, okay, given all of that language and rhetoric about how we're not so certain about some of the things we take for granted, how we're theorizing about the material world, how what we really have is the mind and what we really have is our own mind. But I do believe in communication with other people, so we have some sort of reports on what the experiences other minds are. I speak from the point of view of not being a solipsist, assuming at this point, after a few levels of deduction and induction, that there are other agents besides myself, that you're having the same kind of experience of your own film strip. So, having given all of these doubts, and people like Gary, can't get past. He said we could be a dreamer. What bullshit? We couldn't. Well, I don't think we're the dreamer in the dreamer, or that the dreamer metaphor is the best, most useful metaphor, um, or useful at all. Because if we were in a dreamer's dream, it's not like our dreams at night, and that's where the metaphor comes from. So, what would we really be saying if we're in a dream that's like follows the laws of physics that we've already established are damn consistent? So, this is why I choose materialism, given all the options I just described and given the layering that I just described.
I want to make a couple more videos referring to this diagram I made, and get into some of the issues that I wanted to address. The first one is why the materialistic model. Um, why do we want to use the materialist model if, as I said, we don't really know that our senses are not being generated by some computer simulation or by a dreamer. Really, these are brain in the vat kind of examples. Um, why the materials? Well, what's the difference? And I was getting in this, but I didn't think I worded it particularly well in the last video because it wasn't my primary point either. But why choose the materialist model if these others, also will fit the experience? And I think the reason is that we have this model. We have the model of the cup as material thing. Even if it's computer generated, right now, if it's computer generated, the world around us and our perceptions, we still have this model of the material mug. Why? Because one aspect of this generation is that it's very consistent. We have learned to have faith in laws of cause and effect and the other ramifications of a continuous reality. And again, when I say that, if you think about quantum theory, it's not really continuous. It's discrete at the lowest level. But the law of continuity still comes from, in that case, the conservation of energy. So that even though there's discrete events, there's always a conservation of energy, and that adds up to being an equivalent of continuity in a discrete universe. So we have these elements of consistency, and we've learned them from watching our perceptions. Now, the brain in the vat model, that we're in a dream or some matrix-like simulation, those are just coincidentally continuous. The whole element of dream metaphor, invokes the idea that, you know, perhaps we could overcome the continuity. Like in the Matrix, perhaps we could get, superpowers. We could learn how to break the continuity of the universe. And that's what I was getting at when I mentioned that, the materialism doesn't distract us to these hopes and desires, that maybe just with the proper thought process we could hack the system or hack the dream, or you know it those models motivate us to look for the discontinuity. Where a materialist model, we embrace this continuity and we use it to explore the universe further. What element of that we're in a dream.
Right. So, in other words, the materialist model is a model designed to keep filling in the blanks. The dream, matrix, brain in a vat, magical, mystical God universe, those give us no reason. The gaps are filled in with, concrete. They give us no reason to go find out the details of how gravity works and if there's a graviton, because it doesn't really matter. In the end, it's arbitrary and it could be changed. If the gravity works a certain way, well, somebody could just slap some code, it'll work a different way. God could turn over in her bed and be dreaming differently, and suddenly gravity goes in a different way. Right? The mechanical model says, well, there's a gap. We know it pulls things with this amount of acceleration, but we don't know, why that is, or if there's particles, or, you know, what is the phrase gravitational field even mean? We don't know those things. The material model is a model for autodidactic learning, self-teaching.
Motivates us to continue to look at, to investigate the world as it appears to be. At that point, you're trying to get past the appearances, because the appearances are such illusion that you want to look past them. And it's not that I don't think that's a good thing to try. I do think it's a good thing to try, but it has been tried. And really, historically, let's say our pre-rational belief systems, or whatever you want to call them, we have spent thousands, if not tens of thousands of years in models like that,
And I think it's probably hundreds of thousands of years.
where
Meaning with religious models that the universe isn't really continuous for a powerful enough being that, law of conservation of energy wouldn't be a thing for real. It's just something we mortals are stuck with until we become a guru.
God is not bound. This theistic model is not bound to continuity. God could make something appear out of nowhere. Whereas in our materialist model, we would wonder, well, if something appeared out of nowhere, what happens to the air that was there? And there'd be a huge shock. We like in good science fiction, if we do suspend our disbelief that there could be teleportation, then we ask about the material ramifications of it. But if we're in a dream or computer simulation, there don't have to be material ramifications. So only a materialist model, and there are more than one way to set up a materialist model, but any model you would call materialist will um, will continue to obey this idea of continuity, and of anything that happens in this material world having material consequences. And that's what makes it a better model, because it's more consistent with the principles we've drawn from it. We have this world generated, and it's so consistent that every time we test it and look to see if it's behaving in regular fashions, even when we have issues of probabilistic phenomena, there's the patterns are knowable and deducible and can be characterized, you know, with mathematics, for example. So, the idea that the world really is materials is more consistent with that. And, I think it makes sense too, because let's say we were making a mistake. Let's say we really are in a computer generation and we assume that it's a material world, and so we're wrong. Well, I think investigating the material world and looking closely at our perceptions for what appears to be the case uh, is likely to be the most fruitful path by which we would discover that we are in a matrix. I mean, sometime we'll discover that there's some little glitch, or we will see that, and that theory, if it's true, will come down the pipe. And I don't see it the other way around. If we became convinced that we are in a matrix world, then in what way does that inspire you to study what appears to be the case? I don't think it does. So, with that male sound, I leave you. Cheers.
Hello, modern mystic.
Okay,
There's a little
stop.
thing about reality.
All right.
I said I'd make another video. There's actually even
Clicks work slow when this thing's running. All right, well, I think that's enough.